A Voice from Waterloo is the humble tale of an old soldier who was an eyewitness to and participant in many of the scenes he attempts to describe. Edward Cotton served in the 7th Hussars. Let's begin. What were Napoleon's plans, and how sanguine were his expectations, will be placed beyond all doubt by the following letter, written to the Prince de la Moscow, the renowned Ney, who had joined the army but the evening before, and by his proclamation addressed to the Belgians. To the Prince de la Moscow. Charleroi, June 16, 1815. Cousin. I send you the present letter by my aide-de-camp, General Flahot. The Major General, Soult, must have already dispatched orders to you, but you will receive these sooner, because my officers are faster than his. You will receive the general order of the day, but I wish to write to you in detail, because it is of the very highest importance. I advance Marshal Grouchy with the 3rd and 4th Corps of Infantry upon Somboeuf, and my guard upon Fleurus, where I shall be in person before midday. If I find the enemy there, I shall attack him, and drive everything before me as far as Gembloux. There I shall decide, according to the events of the morning, what is to be done. My decision will be made, perhaps at 3 o'clock, perhaps in the evening. My intention is that the moment I have determined on my plan, you should be in readiness to march on Brussels. I will support you with the guard, which will be at Fleurus or at Somboeuf, and I should like to reach Brussels tomorrow morning. You should set forward this evening, if I can form my plan in time for you to hear from me today, and you should march 3 or 4 leagues before night, and be in Brussels at 7 tomorrow morning. You can dispose of your troops in the following manner: 1 division 2 leagues in advance of Quatre Bras, if there should be no obstacle, 6 divisions of infantry about Quatre Bras, and 1 division at Marbase, in order that I may have its assistance, should I want it, at Somboeuf, but this is not to delay your march. Count de Valmy's corps, which contains 3,000 cuirassiers of elite, at the intersection of the Roman Way with the Brussels road, in case I should need it. As soon as ever I have formed my plan, you will order this division to rejoin you. I should like to have with me the division of the Guard which is commanded by General Lefebvre Desnouettes, and I send you in exchange the 2 divisions of Count de Valmy's corps. But, according to my plans at this moment, I prefer posting Count de Valmy in such a manner as to have him within reach if I want him, and to avoid causing General Lefebvre Desnouettes any false marches, for it is probable that I shall resolve upon marching with the Guard this evening upon Brussels. Nevertheless, cover Lefebvre's division by the 2 divisions of cavalry belonging to Delon and Ray, in order to spare the Guard, for if there should be any hot work with the English, it is better that it should be with our line than the Guard. I have adopted as a general principle of this campaign, to divide my army into 2 wings, and a reserve. Your wing will consist of the 4 divisions of the 1st Corps, of the 4 divisions of the 2nd Corps, of 2 divisions of light cavalry, and the 2 divisions of Count de Valmy's corps. The number of these troops cannot be much less than 45 or 50,000 men. Marshal Grouchy will have nearly an equal number, and will command the right wing. The Guard will form the reserve, and I shall bring it up in support of the one wing or the other, according to circumstances. The Major General will issue the most precise orders, in order to secure obedience to you, when you have a separate command. Whenever I am present, the commanders of corps will receive orders directly from me. I shall draw troops, according to circumstances, from either wing, to strengthen my reserve. You well understand the importance attached to the taking of Brussels. It may also produce important results, for a movement of such promptitude and daring will cut off the English troops at Mons, Ostend, etc. I wish your measures to be so taken, that, at the first order, your 8 divisions may be able to march rapidly on Brussels, without any difficulty. Napoleon. Proclamation to the Belgians and inhabitants of the left bank of the Rhine. The ephemeral success of my enemies detached you for a moment from my empire. In my exile upon a rock in the sea, I heard your complaints. The god of battle has decided the fate of your beautiful provinces. Napoleon is among you. You are worthy to be Frenchmen. Rise in mass, join my invincible phalanxes, to exterminate the remainder of those barbarians, who are your enemies and mine. They fly with rage and despair in their hearts. Signed, Napoleon. By the Emperor. The Major General of the Army. Count Bertrand. At the Imperial Palace of Laeken. Little comment need be made upon this letter and proclamation. They are characteristic of Napoleon. A most able plan of operations is developed with his usual recklessness of human life. We see him prepared to sacrifice his troops of the line to save his guard, and either wing, so that with the other he might make a dash at Brussels. His overweening confidence of being there even early on the 17th, and his sanguine expectations that the population would support him, are clearly shown by the above documents. Napoleon must evidently have miscalculated the degree of energy and promptitude necessary to overcome 2 such generals as Wellington and Blucher. He sadly underrated the gallant troops which he and his marshal had to combat. And when adverse writers talk so much of the calculating, cautious and methodical Wellington, as Napoleon was pleased to call him, being taken by surprise in this campaign, we may venture to ask, was not the emperor taken by surprise and thrown out in all his calculations by the extreme vigilance and energy which brought 3 corps of the Prussian army, above 85,000 men, into position at Ligny by midday on the 16th? And but for an error in the transmission of orders, these troops would also have been joined by Bulow's corps, and had General Zieten sent information to General Muffling or to the Duke of Wellington at Brussels, when the French army in 3 columns was first seen in his front in advance of Charleroi, the whole allied army might have been concentrated at Quatre Bras during the night of the 15th. Wellington in person was at Ligny on the 16th, observing Napoleon preparing for battle, and after conferring with Blucher, he returned to Quatre Bras in time to give a most critical check to the gallant Ney. Was it no surprise to Napoleon to find that Wellington, upon hearing of Blucher's retreat from Ligny, instead of falling back to Ostend, etc., immediately retired with ominous steadiness upon Mont Street Jean? And there arrested the ambition of his opponent, who, instead of being at Brussels early on the 17th, as intimated to Ney, was compelled to open his eyes, on the morning of the 18th, to the fact that he was still above 12 miles from Brussels, and unable to advance a step nearer without fighting a desperate battle, and staking his empire on the result. He did fight, the stake was lost, and, by the next morning, he found himself again at Charleroi, whence he had dispatched his memorable letter to his cousin Ney but 2 days before. He must have felt an agony of surprise and something more, as he fled on for his very life, to escape from his enraged pursuers. M. de Vaulabelle indeed, in his campaign and Battle of Waterloo published at Paris in 1845, attributes the non-arrival of Napoleon at Brussels, to his having calculated that the Prussians would not assemble in any great force until the 17th, and further on the author says, Napoleon's plans and arrangements were frustrated and his sanguine expectations disappointed, on finding a barrier of 95,000 Prussians assembled between him and the Belgian capital. The above author also informs us, that a longer delay on the 16th, in executing his projected movements at Ligny, would have compromised his success on that day, and that on the 17th, fresh delays succeeded those of the 2 preceding ones. Ney's troops, although the marshal, it is pretended, received orders to renew the attack on Quatre Bras at break of day, were still in bivouac at 11 o'clock. We are given to understand by M. de Vaulabelle, that similar delays occurred to different corps placed under the direct command of the Emperor and Marshal Grouchy. We are also told that the soldiers grumbled at this inaction of which they did not know the motives, questioned their officers, and interrogated their generals. In fact, to use the author's words, l'OAG et l'activité semblait etc. refuges dans leur rang. All energy and activity seemed to have taken refuge in their ranks. The inhabitants of Street Amand also affirm that, on a group of generals passing through the village, the soldiers followed them with their cries, "We made our soup at break of day in order to be sooner at the ball, and we have been 4 hours doing nothing, why don't we fight?" There is something underhand. In face of all these discrepant statements, and upon calm reflection and close examination of the history of the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon's disasters should not be attributed to the neglect or disobedience of his generals, but, under Providence, to the consummate bravery of the troops, and the skill of the generals opposed to him. Napoleon, when at Street Helena, admitted that the tactics of his army in the Waterloo campaign had their defects, but on no occasion, to my knowledge, did he admit that he himself had committed an error. He invariably endeavored to shift all blame, more especially the irretrievable failure at Waterloo, to other shoulders than his own, to those of his marshals. He accused Grouchy, the well-tried soldier in many a hard-fought field, and who was banished for his attachment to the imperial cause, of having, by neglect, delay and non-compliance with orders, occasioned his defeat at Waterloo, and Grouchy's alleged false movement is the basis of every argument advanced by those who yet maintain the military infallibility of their idolized emperor. One would imagine, from the tenor of Napoleon's order of the day on the 14th of June, soldiers, we have forced marches to make, battles to fight, dangers to encounter, that he would not have allowed the precious hours of the morning of the 16th to be frittered away in inactivity, or have left his troops until near 11 o'clock in the bivouac of the night before, chiefly where they crossed the Sambre, viz. At Charleroi, Châtelet, and Marchiennes, without making a movement to support his advanced troops at Franz and Fleurus. No doubt the French were fatigued and wanted rest, but, as the success of the campaign depended upon vigorously pressing forward, and making the most of the first advantages, there was no time for rest. Again, on the 17th, after the battles of Quatre Bras and Ligny, we find Napoleon lingering on the field of Ligny, visiting the wounded, and expressing his satisfaction at witnessing the gallantry of his troops. We find him discussing, with Gérard and Grouchy, subjects in no way connected with the campaign which should decree him emperor or exile. We find it to be near 1 o'clock p.m., 17th, before he put his own force in motion to join Ney in pursuit of us, or before he gave Grouchy his orders to pursue the Prussians. Early in the morning, Pajol's cavalry and Tester's infantry divisions were detached towards Namur, in pursuit of the Prussians, and, strange to say, when, after capturing a Prussian battery on the Namur road, and sending it to the imperial headquarters, they found themselves completely baffled and at fault, they returned to their bivouac of the preceding night near Mazy, and lay there till next morning, the 18th. The Prussians, after their line had been broken about 9 o'clock on the 16th at Ligny, were allowed to retreat upon Wavre unmolested, nor did Grouchy, who was subsequently ordered by Napoleon to follow the Prussians and not to let them out of his sight, to complete their defeat by attacking them and prevent their effecting a junction with the Allies, know until the afternoon of the 17th by what route the main Prussian army had retreated. Grouchy's advance guard did not come up with the Prussian rear till 10:30 a.m. of the 18th, when 3 out of the 4 Prussian corps were already on their march to join us. Of this Grouchy knew nothing, so far from it, he believed he had the whole Prussian army before him. If it be objected to Grouchy that he did not act up to the letter or the spirit of his instructions, we affirm that it was impossible for him to do so, the delay in giving him his orders having enabled the Prussians to gain 14 hours' start of him. This fact the Marshal communicated to the Emperor, who replied that he, with the rest of his army, was about to follow the English and give them battle, should they take position in front of the forest of Soignies, directing Grouchy to communicate with him by the paved road of Quatre Bras, but not a word about the generals joining in his attack on the English. Napoleon followed us by the paved road to La Belle Alliance. Grouchy followed the Prussians by crossroads to Gembloux, about 6 miles, where he halted for the night, and wrote to Napoleon, receiving the following answer, dated Farm of Caillou, 10 o'clock a.m. June 18, 1815. I am directed, says the Adjutant General, Soult, by the Emperor, to acquaint you that he is going to attack the English who are in line of battle in front of Waterloo, near the forest of Soignies. His Majesty directs you will move upon Wavre, to be nearer to us, to report your operations, to keep up a communication, etc. Again, not one word about marching to assist the Emperor, and here we may observe that Wavre is not in the direction of Mont Street Jean. When, however, at 1 o'clock, Napoleon found that Wellington was not to be trifled with, and that a Prussian corps was hovering upon his right flank, he dispatched another order, dated Field of Battle, Waterloo, 1 o'clock p.m. June 18, 1815. Monsieur le Maréchal. You wrote from Gembloux this morning at 2 o'clock, informing the Emperor, you were about to march to Saint-Lez-Walhain. His Majesty now directs you will maneuver in our direction. You must find out the point, in order to keep up the communication, and be at hand to fall upon and destroy any enemy that may attempt to attack our right. At this moment we are engaged in battle on the line of Waterloo, the enemy's centre is Mont Street Jean, so maneuver to join our right without loss of time. The Adjutant General, Duke of Dalmatia. P.S. An intercepted letter informs us that the Prussian General Bülow is about to attack our right flank. We think we see the corps on the heights of Street Lambert, so approach us without losing an instant, and destroy Bülow, should you catch him in the fact. The order was in itself no doubt sound and judicious, but the original vice we have already alluded to, as characterizing the movements of the French army after the passage of the Sambre, rendered obedience impossible. The letter, written at 1 o'clock, did not reach Grouchy until 7, about which time Napoleon's right had been attacked and driven back by Bülow's advanced brigades. It was 7:30 a.m. on the 18th of June, when Grouchy moved from his bivouac at Gembloux, and, owing to the bad state of the roads, nearly 11:30, before he reached Saint-Lez-Walhain, a distance of about 6 miles. At the latter place, the report of a heavy cannonade was distinctly heard in the direction of Waterloo. Grouchy was strongly urged by some of his generals to march towards the firing, and for not doing so, he has been attacked at all points. He declined the proposition of his generals, on the ground that he did not consider it his duty to march towards the battle already raging elsewhere, but to attack, according to his instructions, the Prussians with whom he had just come up. Grouchy has since declared that he did not consider it his duty to follow the advice of Gérard and the other generals, and that to have done so would have been acting contrary to his orders. To have detached a portion of his force towards the main French army would have separated his 2 corps by the Dyle River, whose waters were much swollen by the heavy rains, and whose banks were so swampy, that it would have been impossible for his divisions to have mutually supported each other. Consequently he continued his march upon Wavre. For argument's sake, we will suppose that Grouchy adopts the advice of his generals, and commences his march at the time the firing was first heard, about 12:30. On average roads in fair condition, an army of 32,000 men of all arms would take 7 hours to march 15 miles. They had already marched about 6 miles, as we have seen, over bad roads. From Saint-Lez-Walhain to Plancenoit, Napoleon's right, the distance is about 16 miles, and over bad roads. How could they have come up in time, and that, without taking into account the obstructions which they must have encountered from the Prussian corps who was scouring the whole of that part of the country? It was utterly impossible for Grouchy, after breaking up his bivouac at Gembloux so late as 7:30 on the morning of the 18th, to prevent the three Prussian corps, who well knew his movements, from forming a junction with us, or from attacking the French right. Had Grouchy left Gembloux at 2:00 a.m., and marched, unmolested by the Prussians, by Street Guibert and Moustier to Street Lambert, and taken position near the defiles of the Lenin Street Lambert, he might have kept Bulow from attacking the French right, and Napoleon might, before 8 o'clock, about which time a brigade of Perches and part of a brigade of Ziethen's corps came up, have attacked Wellington with his whole remaining force. After the unaccountable delay on the 17th, the division of his force by Napoleon appears a false move, for a corps of cavalry would have sufficed to watch the Prussians. Grouchy, unquestionably, was dilatory, and wanting in his former energy and judgment, for though he must have known that the Prussians, or a large portion of them, would attempt their junction with us, he sent out no patrols to ascertain whether the contemplated movement was in operation, and neglected to keep up that which is always so essential, a close communication with the main body of the French army. His whole attention appears to have been directed to his right, the events on his left he entirely neglected. We have stated Napoleon's anxiety to impute the blame of the failure exclusively to his two marshals. We have endeavored, in the fair and fearless spirit of military criticism, to examine how far such inculpation is borne out by facts in the case of Marshal Grouchy, and we now, in the same impartial manner, propose to analyze the accusation made against the gallant and daring Ney, the bravest of the brave. The charges are twofold: delay at Quatre Bras, and rashness at Waterloo. Ney, as we have seen, had been ordered by Napoleon, on the morning of the 16th, to seize Quatre Bras, to occupy Genappe if practicable, and to be ready to march on Brussels the same evening, 16th, or on the morning of the 17th at latest, as the seizure of the capital by a coup de main on the 17th was the Emperor's grand object. For this purpose Ney was, if possible, to press forward 3 or 4 leagues at least, on the 16th, and to be supported by the light cavalry of the Imperial Guard. Now, Ney is blamed by Napoleon and other military writers, French, for not having gained possession of Quatre Bras early on the 16th, before our force came up. Certainly no British soldier underrates the value of an early attack, as Arroyo de Molinos can testify, but was Ney justified in attempting to obtain possession of Quatre Bras? We incline to think he was not. More than one half of his force was still in the rear. Delon's corps was on the Sambre, or close to it. Girard's division of Ray's corps was near Fleurus with Grouchy, and Kellermann's cavalry had not joined. No blame to him, the gallant Ney, for that. He had joined the army but the evening before, the 15th. Notwithstanding these untoward events, he ordered forward Ray's 2nd Corps, but finding that heavy masses of the enemy were concentrating at Street Amand on his right, and ignorant of the force in his front, he judiciously declined to press on till Delon came up as a support. This concludes the 13th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of Cotton's description of the battle? Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.